This real debate brought to you by freeandequal.org and theywillbeheard.com.
And the interest that these other political parties have when they govern. They don't govern to defend your interests. And the candidates that are running have already demonstrated to you that they don't care about your economic well-being, that they don't care about your civil liberties, that they don't care about the American people. And I agree with Mr. Castle. You and everybody watching this on the internet or elsewhere, you need to look deep inside of yourself. I heard Ralph Nader say this, and it's so true. People, you know, we've been voting for winners, and we keep losing, right? We keep voting for these two political parties, and we don't get anywhere. If Barack Obama's president, 4 years, 8 years, then there'll be a Republican president, 4 years, 8 years, then there'll be a Democratic Party. The way these issues are going to be addressed is very narrow. Eugene Debs ran for president in the early 20th century. He said women should have the right to vote. He never got more than 5 or 6%. And I often ask people, would you have been throwing your vote away if you cast it for that candidate who thought women should be allowed to vote? No, you would have been standing up for principle. And I would love to hear the arguments that people made in the day about, oh, you're wasting your vote. That's not a very important issue. I urge you to vote for peace, vote for civil liberties, vote for a better democracy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the vice presidential nominees for participating in this debate tonight. They did an excellent job, didn't they?
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd also like to thank Free and Equal Elections and its founder, Christine Tobin, and also They Will Be Heard for putting on a fantastic event.
And our moderator, I say.
I'd also like to remind you that if you'd like to contribute to the effort of breaking down the restrictions to ballot access laws in the United States, go to freeandequal.org. Thank you very much for coming tonight. You were wonderful.
Good evening. My name is John Gigliardi. I'm the political reporter for the SF Weekly, San Francisco, California. And I will be your moderator for tonight's debate. All vice presidential candidates who were on enough ballots to participate in this presidential election were invited. In tonight's debate, we do have three candidates, one from the Libertarian Party, Constitutional Party, and the Independent Party. I'd like to thank the sponsors of tonight's event, Free and Equal Elections, and this is Free and Equal Elections founder, Christine Tobin. And also, They Will Be Heard. Tonight's debate will be streaming on freeandequal.org for those who'd like to watch it. The candidates we have here tonight are Vice Presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party, Wayne Allyn Root, he's a Las Vegas native son, a television producer, author, and entrepreneur. The Libertarian Party presidential candidate is Bob Barr. Also debating tonight is Constitutional Party Vice Presidential nominee, Darrell Castle. And political activist and attorney who hails from Memphis, Tennessee. The Constitutional Party presidential candidate is Pastor Chuck Baldwin. And third, we have a vice presidential nominee for the Independent Party, Matt Gonzalez. A civil rights attorney and former president of the San Francisco City Council. The Independent Party presidential candidate is Ralph Nader. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for coming tonight. The candidates will have 3 minutes for an opening statement and 3 minutes for a concluding statement. I will be asking 6 questions in which each candidate will have 2.5 minutes to respond to each question. Each candidate will answer each question in succession. In addition, candidates will have 5 90-second response periods or rebuttal periods in which they can reply to a candidate's answer after all candidates have answered a given question. Candidates are free to use 1 or even all 5 of these response periods to a given question, with the understanding that each candidate is limited to only 5 total rebuttal periods for all 6 questions. So let's start with the opening statement. Mr. Gonzalez, why don't you start?
Thank you, John. As John mentioned, I'm Ralph Nader's running mate, and of course he's well known to the American people. For the last 40 years he's been fighting as a consumer advocate, he's been defending your civil liberties, and he's been warning against increased corporate power and abuses. I myself held office in San Francisco. I was elected there a member of the Board of Supervisors, and I was elected by my colleagues to be the president of the board. I worked on matters such as helping to create the highest minimum wage in the country that had an indicator for inflation so that it went up on its own, and also a method of voting called ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting that allows you to get a majority winner with 1 trip to the ballot box so that you don't have to have a runoff a month later and you don't have to decide a political contest by less than 50% of the vote. Ralph Nader and I are running because we want to create a more egalitarian and democratic society. And I'm afraid that it's increasingly becoming apparent that that's simply not possible with the candidates representing the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. They have not been defending our civil liberties, and they have abused the trust that the American people has given them, most recently economically. We've been traveling around the United States. We have been listening to the American people. Ralph Nader will have visited all 50 states by the end of the contest on Tuesday, and we are hearing a lot of frustration from the American people. We are hearing questions like, how is it that the federal government finds $700 billion to bail out banks, but tell us that there's not enough money for health care or not enough money for good public education? And if you saw the Wall Street Journal recently, they reported that $40 billion of that bailout, of course, is going to go to bonuses for executives and traders who were recently bailed out with our money. We have also been shocked, amused, I would even say depressed by the primary narrative coming from the Democratic Party that is in effect in saying we need to get rid of George Bush and replace him with change agents that are going to take care of us and defend us. The reason I say we're depressed and amused and shocked by it is that if you look at the history of this particular political party, recently they have been complicit in George Bush's worst acts. They supported the war, and their candidate has supported war appropriations. They vote for the Patriot Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And Ralph Nader and I want something very different. We want to end the war. We want to end corporate personhood, which is a fiction. We want to restore civil liberties. We want single-payer health care, and we want alternative energy. Thank you for being here tonight.
Mr. Castle?
Well, I too thank the sponsors of this event and those of you in attendance, and also the other 2 candidates who come here and put themselves before the public and try to increase participation in the democratic process. I share Mr. Gonzalez's view that what we're seeing now from the Democratic and Republican parties and their candidates in particular is a perversion of the process. And I think Chuck Baldwin and I have also traveled around the country, and wherever we've gone and talked to people, everyone says that there's something wrong. Everyone that you see, from the cab driver who brings you from the airport to the waiter or waitress in your hotel, they will tell you that something's wrong and they don't know exactly what it is. Well, when we look at the situation that we have now with the election, which we're told is over and already been decided, what we see are two candidates who appear to be different. One is obviously darker skinned, one is obviously older, but when you listen to their rhetoric and their agendas, they're almost identical. We seek to do something different from that. The Constitution Party, first of all, we don't call ourselves the Constitution Party for nothing. That name reflects our adherence to the Constitution and our belief that most of the problems that the nation faces today could be resolved if we would just return to constitutional government. If we would just remember the Constitution and the rule of law, we could solve most of the problems that we have today. The rule of law is important. It's one of the basic foundations of our society. And without it, when the rule of law fails, then the rule of force prevails. And what you have is what we see today in this election process, kind of a theater for the masses, a public spectacle for our benefit. I mean, I've always enjoyed theater, but not that kind. A public spectacle for people where secretly similar people rule in both camps through some type of intentionally inflicted chaos that could better be described as rule from above through division below. Race versus race, male versus female, young versus old, rich versus poor, everything explained in those terms so that we're all constantly pitted against each other in a eternal conflict that can only be decided by a Democrat or a Republican, kind of like what Bastiat described as creating the antidote and the poison in the same laboratory. But people quite often, when they come together, find that they have more in common than they might think.
Thank you very much, Mr. Castle. Mr. Root.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wayne Allen Root. I want a show of hands. How many of you know Ron Paul? Show of hands. I'm Ron Paul on steroids. And the great thing about my campaign is 25 years from now, I'll still be younger than Ron Paul is today. My goal is to finish what Ron Paul started. Let me tell you about myself. I'm an SOB, son of a butcher. I'm a small businessman. I'm a homeschool father of 4 young kids. I'm a citizen politician, just as the founding fathers intended in 1776. And probably most importantly, I'm the first Nevadan ever to run for Vice President of the United States. It's also the first time in history that 2 college classmates are running against each other in a presidential ticket. Barack Obama and I are classmates, class of '83, Columbia University, and as I found out recently, Matt Gonzalez, also a Columbia University. So, I am the very definition of an anti-politician. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a lobbyist, I'm not a career politician, I'm not a career bureaucrat. I'm proud to say what I am is a taxpayer. You see, taxpayers pay all the bills, all the freight for the lawyers, the lobbyists, the politicians, and the career bureaucrats. My credo comes from Ronald Reagan. He said the 9 worst words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." My campaign theme is simple. Open your wallet, look inside, vote for me, and I promise to stay the hell out of there. You know why government should not be taking your money? Because it's your money. It's about time a politician told you that it's your money, and the government should be asking, they should be saying please, and when you give it to them, they should be saying thank you. But Obama and McCain and the bailout prove government's willing to grab your money, our money, taxpayer money. We had absolutely nothing to do with the problems on Wall Street, the problems in banking, and yet they took our money to pay off the people who got in trouble in the first place. I'm proud to be from Nevada. I think it's very important to have someone running for president or vice president on a presidential ticket from Nevada. Do you know what the difference is between Las Vegas and Washington, D.C.? In Vegas, the drunks gamble with their own money. In Nevada, you may lose your money when you come here, but you have a chance. It's fair. It's not rigged. When you go to Washington, D.C., the system is rigged against the taxpayers. In conclusion, what I stand for is simple. Smaller government, less spending, less taxes. I want to rein in entitlements, rein in state and federal employees. I want more freedom. I believe in school choice and no more bailouts. That's what I believe in. Thank you.
All right, the first question. Both the Republican candidate for president, Senator John McCain, and the Democratic candidate for president, Senator Barack Obama, have pledged to continue the global war on terrorism. Both want to keep troops in Iraq to varying degrees, and both have vowed to send more troops to Afghanistan. Both senators have proposed a military buildup, even though military spending has more than doubled in the last 7 years to nearly $700 billion annually. And both have endorsed a plan to shore up the Israeli military with $30 billion over the next 10 years. The question to the candidates is, would your administration support these policies? And if not, why? Mr. Castle, would you start?
Well, no, Baldwin Castle administration would not support those policies, not at all. We think that the global war on terrorism is total nonsense and should be stopped immediately. We also believe that it's not really about terrorism. If it were, we would do something about the terrorists who openly enter our country every day if they so choose. So we believe in a foreign policy that could be described as non-interventionist or mind your own business. And we would certainly set about the process of doing that by bringing the troops home from Iraq and Afghanistan and roughly 140 other countries around the world. That number varies from day to day, but that's essentially the number. If I'm trying to remember the rest of the question. But the military budget, certainly the military budget can be. Certainly believe in a strong defense, a defense that's truly for defense of America and for the defense of the American people and our way of life. But we could save $12 billion every 2 weeks by simply withdrawing from Iraq, where we shouldn't have been in the first place. So that's basically the Constitution Party's position on the war on terrorism and on defense and the defense budget.
Mr. Root?
Well, the Libertarian Party's position and my position are the same on this. The role of the United States military is, in fact, to defend our nation. We'd like to put the word defense back into the defense policy. We don't believe that the defense of the United States requires spending trillions of dollars on nation building. We don't believe it requires using our money to prop up the defense of prosperous neighbors like Japan, Germany, and South Korea. I think libertarian positions are common sense positions. And when I think about it from a common sense standpoint, when we spend billions of dollars on rich nations like Germany, Japan, and South Korea, what we're doing is we're allowing them to take those billions of dollars, instead of using it on their national defense, they're able to prop up their economies, they're able to use it to subsidize their auto industries and beat us at our own game when it comes to the economy. That's what we've done for the last 50 years. The Cold War is over. Japan could pay for their own defense. Germany could pay for their own defense. South Korea can pay for its own defense. I don't believe in using our money or our power to stuff democracy down the throats of foreign nations that don't want it, don't appreciate it, don't want us there. If Iraq doesn't want us there, it's time to get out. And yet here we have Iraq literally saying, we want you out in the next 16 months, and we have an American administration saying, well, hold it, we don't want to leave yet. If the Iraqi government feels we've stayed long enough, we should be out. I believe it's important we stop using foreign aid to prop up tin pot dictators. People who, in my opinion, take that money, steal it, loot it, don't give it to their people, and then vote against us in the United Nations. If Bob Barr and I became president, vice president of the United States, I guarantee you we would dramatically cut foreign aid, dramatically cut military bases around the world, and beat a hasty exit from nations who were not wanted like Iraq. I think it's also important to note that we've got tremendous waste in the Pentagon budget. You're talking to a lifelong former Republican who for years thought waste, waste, waste. Well, that's the woman on welfare in Detroit. Well, no, it's not. It's also the defense contractors ripping off the American taxpayer. There was recently a study in the United States that looked at 85 programs in the defense budget, and they found $296 billion in cost overruns in just those 86 programs. Ladies and gentlemen, that doesn't mean you'd have to cancel those programs. You'd merely have to cancel the cost overruns to save almost as much money as the entire national budget deficit. And last but not least, we simply cannot afford Iraq or expeditions like it anymore. And on the way out the door, the first question I'd ask is, where's the money for the oil? You told us you were going to pay for the war with the oil. Here's a bill for $1 trillion
Thank you,
for the
Mr.
next
Rhodes.
20 years we demand to be paid back. Thank you.
Mr. Gonzalez.
I think it's significant that all three of us agree that this is not a war that really we shouldn't be in. I think it's a war that had faulty justifications. There were no weapons of mass destruction, and we did not allow diplomacy to work. There was still progress being made by weapons inspectors, and we had a president that was eager to go to war because of other interests. I agree that there should be a certain level of non-interventionism as it relates to foreign policy, but I want to say that that runs perilously close sometimes to the idea that we might be isolationists. And I just want to say and make clear that I don't believe that we can be that way in today's world. I think the nature of technology, the nature of interdependence is such that we have to deal with the reality that nuclear armaments are now in the hands of Russia, China, India, Pakistan, probably Israel and South Africa and North Korea. There is no Walden Pond, so to speak, of the world market. And I think because of these threats, even to the extent that we don't want to be interventionists, we're going to have to find a way to dialogue with other nations that have other interests and that have other goals and find a way to keep the world safe. It's not by using the military, however. I think that we have to promote democracy aggressively. I think we have to promote the free exchange of ideas. We have to provide food to those who need it, water, health care, and we have to repudiate arms sales that we have so often relied upon to find friends out in the world. Look, the United States has over 40, 50, we have hundreds of military bases in 40 or 50 different countries. As John mentioned in the question itself, our military spending in the last 7 years has gone up by $400 billion. I mean, this is money that could have been put into public education. It could fund single-payer health care for all Americans. And so we have to find a different path. Finally, as it relates to Israel, let me just say, the United States has to stop funding what is in effect the occupation of the West Bank and other territories. We have to promote a two-state solution, the 1967 borders, and we're not going to get anywhere unless we do that. There are many good Jews and Palestinians that are working for peace, and we have to get up behind them and prop those efforts up if we're going to stabilize this world.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. The second question.
John, I'm sorry. I'm wondering if anybody wants to use their rebuttal time. I know that was the end of the first.
I'll take a shot at it. The Constitution Party doesn't believe in isolationism. We believe in trading with all people and being friendly with all people who are friends. But we are steadfastly opposed to using our children to go abroad and kill them unless they are a strategic threat to the United States and the American people. We believe that all foreign aid of any kind, economic or military, should be stopped immediately. We've got to stop spending our money in foreign countries. It causes more harm than it does good. I mean, we give Israel $10 billion, so we give their enemies 20. How much sense does that make? Israel would be far better off if we gave no one any money. Besides, I mean, where do we get off giving people money when we owe $11.3 trillion?
want to jump in and just add this idea that the administration has been putting out, this notion that the surge is working. And you've got candidates like Barack Obama saying, we're now going to take troops from Iraq and move them over to Afghanistan. You know, the surge began in January 2007. Since that time, there have been 1,000 American soldiers killed. There have been over 7,000 wounded. And if it's had any impact at all in terms of the violence in Iraq, it appears to be not because of the surge as much as journalists are reporting that the Bush regime is paying Sunni insurgents $800,000 a day not to fight Americans. And so I think we have to be very mindful that we have an administration in place that has interest in misinformation. I also want to say that the notion that we're going to win the war in Afghanistan is the biggest fiction out there. The Russians were there for 10 years. They committed over 600,000 soldiers, and over 400,000 of them were wounded or ultimately had infectious diseases that forced them to go home. The idea that we're going to take 30,000 soldiers, another 25,000 mercenaries, and turn that into a winning equation in Afghanistan, it's not going to work. And Mr. Nader and I repudiate it, and I certainly ask anyone that's falling for that fiction to look closer at it. Thank you.
The second question. In the last 8 years, it is indisputable that there's been an erosion of our constitutional rights and civil liberties. Most notably, the Patriot Act, which expanded government's powers to monitor our telephones, our emails, and our medical records. There's also an amendment to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, known as FISA, which gave immunities to telecommunication companies that eavesdropped on law-abiding citizens on behalf of the Bush administration. Would your administration support these policies? And if not, should they be turned back? Mr. Root.
Well, I want to point out that as a lifelong former Republican, as someone today who considers himself a libertarian conservative, this is one of those areas where the left and the right come together in agreement. I believe very strongly that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I believe that the President of the United States must follow the rule of law and must follow the United States Constitution. I believe the President, of course, has a right to have executive power and has a right to propose changes in his or her executive power to Congress. But the most important thing is to have accountability, transparency, government oversight, judicial oversight, and of course that would include warrants. One of the easiest things in the world for those of you who have friends in law enforcement to get is a warrant. I find it mind-boggling that we now have a situation where our administration doesn't even want to go to the trouble of getting a warrant to eavesdrop on conversation of Americans, on emails of Americans. I am completely uncomfortable that our administration listens into what I'm saying, what Matt's saying, what Darrell's saying, reads my emails, and thinks they have a right to eavesdrop on my life. They don't. And so I'm someone from the right who believes that the government has no right. I'm someone who believes in the United States Constitution, and one of the reasons we broke away from England in 1776 was for this exact reason, to prevent unlawful seizure, to prevent people kicking in our doors, to prevent, without a warrant, someone listening in to our conversations. And I believe what's happened in the last 8 years is an abomination. And the other thing that I think is important to note is that even if you're a Republican and you agree with George Bush on these ideas, be careful. Be very careful. Because right now, someone's in office that you agree with. And so you think it's great that they've got these fantastic powers, these executive powers that allow them to trample the rights of others who you may not agree with. But someone else is going to get in office, perhaps Barack Obama in a few days, who's the polar opposite politically of George Bush, and he may use those same powers to trample your rights. And so, once again, on this issue, the Libertarian Party and myself, Wayne Allyn Root, come down on the side of transparency, accountability, limited government. Power belongs in the hands of the people as the Constitution intended, not an all-powerful federal government. Thank you.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Well, I think it's important that we take note that in the post-9/11 world that we're in, we put together a commission to try to look at what failings we committed as a government as to why that security failure happened. Now, there are a lot of problems with that commission report, but on this, they're very clear. The problem was that we had security agencies not speaking to one another, and they didn't successfully share information. It had nothing to do with the powers that the government has obtained under the Patriot Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or even the Military Commissions Act. These are direct assaults on our civil liberties. They, in effect, I think, undermine the Constitution, violate the Constitution, and I think we need a litmus test in this country if we're going to take back our democracy. Any politician that voted for these laws should not ever get your vote if you care about civil liberties. Now, the Democrats I mentioned earlier like to suggest that they're going to save us from these laws, and yet they vote for these laws. Barack Obama himself supported the Patriot Act and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which granted immunities to telecommunication companies that had spied on the American people on behalf of the president. We don't even know what they obtained, and our Senate was voting to, in effect, give them immunities. The Military Commissions Act is just a terrible law. It removes constitutional due process rights for habeas corpus for people designated as unlawful enemy combatants, and that's for the president to decide. It allows these individuals to stay in custody without charges. It allows coerced evidence used while literally individuals are beaten to be used in trials against them. It allows the president to define torture outside of the Geneva Convention, and it had other provisions including immunities. I think that we have to be serious about our Constitution. I know the two gentlemen here agree with me on that point. And I think that it is not okay that somebody tells you they're going to change the culture of Washington and they represent a
afraid of, and I would say the same thing about health insurance. What are you afraid of? I'll tell you what I'm afraid of. Choice. You give a single-payer system. There was no discussion. There was no debate. They took taxpayer money, the greatest ripoff, I believe, in the history of taxpayers, and they didn't even ask us. They insulted our intelligence, and it was one of the great redistributions of money from all of us in this room to people on Wall Street and to banks without ever discussing why there was such a need for it. Now, first of all, let's point out the Democrats know better on this topic than Republicans. They say Republicans are for big money and corporations, and they sell out. Barack Obama is one of the biggest contribution of politicians in America for Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac. And he said nothing about the impending crisis. Nothing. He either was too ignorant to know, or he didn't want to know, or he knew and he was bought off. It's as simple as that. John McCain would be standing right here now, days away from victory, if he had said no to the bailout, but he chose to sell out to his friends on Wall Street as well. The fact is, John McCain is the world's biggest anti-earmark politician. Well, the way this bailout got approved is at the last minute, they added $150 billion in waste and corruption and earmarks, and John McCain said nothing. Included in it were some very interesting things. Tax breaks and all sorts of goodies and money for developers of rum in Puerto Rico and companies in American Samoa and companies that made wooden arrows. What does any of that have to do with saving our economy? The answer is nothing. But more importantly, here's what everyone in this room has got to know. Here's what you've got to know. That included in that bill that already passed is new rights and provisions for the Internal Revenue Service to set up undercover sting operations against the American people. And it's already passed.
Thank you, Mr. Rood. Mr. Gonzalez.
Well, let me just... I think this rhetoric about Senator Obama being a socialist is really absurd. I mean, he's voted with Republicans on many measures. He's voted to take away civil liberties. He's supported this bailout of the banks. It's just not credible at all. The problem with this Wall Street bailout is that these political parties are trying to tell you, the Democrats are trying to tell you it's the fault of the Republicans. This is a bipartisan problem. There were laws like the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act of '99, the Commodity Futures Modernization Act of 2000, passed in a bipartisan manner and signed into law by President Clinton. The Commodity Futures Modernization Act wasn't even debated on the floor of the Senate. Every senator voted for it, and what it did is it said to banks that they could sell credit derivatives with no regulations. Well, a credit derivative is the insurance policy or the protection that an investor making risky investments buys so that they're covered. In the old days, if you made risky investments, you made some safe investments. Now you make risky investments and you buy insurance. Because these bipartisan laws took away regulation, these banks were selling this protection even though they had no capital. They were over-leveraged. Now, normally a bank, for every dollar in capital that it has, it can loan out $10. These institutions were, for every dollar they had, they were giving out $50 for the one. Well, no wonder we have this crisis. And when Obama and McCain vote for it, they did it despite the fact that there was an open letter written to Congress concerning the Treasury bailout. September 24th, 200 economists signed it, including Nobel Prize winners, saying we're against it. As I mentioned earlier, it's now insulting to us that $40 billion of this package is going to bonuses, and there's no money being loaned to credit-worthy borrowers. Here we are, taxpayer money, going to try to kickstart the economy, and what do? We can't even get loans out because the banks that are getting the bailouts aren't going for it. I think we need something different, and again, I would add this to the litmus test. Anybody voted for this bailout should not get your vote. It's anti-democratic, it's anti-American, it's anti-everything.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Castle.
Well, I'm going to assume that we're all against the bailouts, and so I'm not going to go into a long story about why they're bad. We just assume that they're bad. But the question now becomes, what do we do? And so the bailouts represent to me an end of the democratic system. It's Congress's way in your face of saying, we don't care what you think because you're just a bunch of idiots. We, the political class, the political elite, know what's best for you. Just, go back to the plantation and go to work, and we'll decide. But what to do now, this is a transference of the ownership of America into the hands of a few international bankers. 3 or 4 large international financial corporations are going to survive through this, and they're going to be at least partially owned by the government. So the government, in effect, is nationalizing the financial industry. So what I propose is that this entire system of debt-based money should be flushed, and a new system that's not based on bank credit and interest-bearing debt should evolve out of it. These companies that are failing should go the way of all failing companies. That's bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is a very fair system. I've been a bankruptcy lawyer for 30 years. I've done thousands of them. So I understand how it works. They should be in bankruptcy so the bankruptcy courts can sort out their bad assets from their real assets and separate them. At the same time, this is an opportunity for Congress to take back its monetary authority from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve should simply go away. We could do the same thing. The correct way to do it would be for Congress to rescind the Federal Reserve Act. But another way would be the way we did AIG. When the Federal Reserve gave AIG $86 billion of our money, they demanded their stock in return. All we have to do is pay the $85 billion. But we could do that with the Federal Reserve. Then Congress could create its own money, issue its own credit without debt and without interest. That makes a lot of sense to me. And it's a system that we should move toward, but it's difficult to do that when your representatives are all owned by one person or another.
Thank you, Mr. Castle. Are there, Mr. Root, a rebuttal?
Matt, you mentioned that the proof that Barack Obama is not a socialist, that he voted for the bailout with John McCain and George Bush. Well, I think you made my point. The bailout is socialism. We've nationalized banks. The only difference between socialism and capitalism, it appears obvious to me, is that in socialism we nationalize profits, and in capitalism we obviously nationalize losses. That's the difference. Here's the thing. I'm sure Matt and I would agree that there was plenty of excess greed on Wall Street that helped to cause this crisis all across America. But I'm sure one area we wouldn't agree on is that that was about 20% of the problem. 80%, once again, was government causing the problem. What my esteemed colleague, Mr. Gonzalez, did not mention is the Community Investment Act of 1977, put into place by a liberal do-gooder named Jimmy Carter, then supercharged on steroids by a liberal do-gooder by the name of Bill Clinton. And basically what it is affirmative action for housing. You see, not enough people of color, minorities, not enough people of low income had home ownership. And there was this noble idea, and it really was a noble idea. I like the idea that we've got to let everyone participate in the American dream. But it was a terrible idea, because anytime government gets involved in business and capitalism, it destroys it. And what we did is we brought up the level of home ownership for low-income people and for minorities, and we destroyed the entire housing market and credit market because we put people in homes just for a reason of affirmative action without any thought to whether they had the credit or the wherewithal to make their payments, and it brought the entire system down. Government won't solve this problem.
Thank you, Mr.
They
Root.
caused the problem.
Any additional rebuttals? Mr. Gonzalez?
Well, let me just say that Ralph Nader has been talking about taxation as it relates to securities. But one of the things he has been advocating, first of all, is this idea that corporate tax contributions as a percentage of overall federal revenue is at a 50-year decline of 7.4% of the total taxes that we collect. He has been arguing that we ought to have a tax system that doesn't go after the things we like, but goes after the things we don't like. So instead of taxing labor, we ought to be taxing things like pollution and speculation and extreme luxuries and things like that. It's also important that he's been saying that taxes on stocks, bonds, and derivative transactions could produce tens of billions of dollars. I've been a legislator. I've compromised. These are capitulations.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Castle.
Well, I certainly agree that the Constitution is important and the rule of law is important. But unfortunately, now we have an administration, a president in particular, who says that the law doesn't apply to him unless he chooses for it to. Recently, in the Posse Comitatus law passed by Congress, he signed it, but he attached a signing statement that says this doesn't apply to me unless I choose for it to. So his reasoning is if he wants to use American military troops against the American people in their own country, he's free to do that in his opinion. But these acts that we're talking about, I mean, who can defend them? There's no reason for us to give up any security in order to, or any freedom in order to obtain security. The reasoning seems to go something like this. These people hate us. I mean, we fight people who hate us because we're free. So we have to give up our freedom so that we can defeat those who hate us. That's the logic. But the long and short of it is that the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, all of those things are totally destructive of the Bill of Rights. I mean, Mr. Jefferson told us in the Declaration of Independence that to secure these rights, governors are instituted among men. That's the purpose of government, to secure our civil rights, if you want to call them that. And yet, we've totally eviscerated the Bill of Rights, the First, Second, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and 10th Amendments. Only now government has to honor and obey those if they choose to, as have been pointed out. So yes, certainly these acts should be withdrawn immediately. And I certainly am all in favor of holding Congress accountable. Every member of the House of Representatives is up for re-election on Tuesday. So I'm in favor of holding them accountable. One of the primary problems that we have in our country right now is that there's no accountability for these people at all. For whatever they do, we may gripe about it, but we do nothing about it. And people simply won't vote for them. I mean, if they didn't vote for them, they couldn't hold office.
Thank you. Rebuttals? Energy has been a very hot topic this election campaign for two reasons. One is that we've experienced a huge increase in oil prices that started to go down a little bit, but there's also been a lot of talk about global warming. America now relies on foreign countries for about 70% of its petroleum. To stave this situation off a bit, both the Republican and Democratic candidates have suggested or put on the table offshore oil drilling, nuclear power, and also an increase in the coal industry in this country. What policies would your administrations propose to reduce the dependency on foreign oil and reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Mr. Gonzalez.
Well, let me first of all just address the offshore oil drilling issue, because I think there's been a lot said about it. Lester Brown and Jonathan Dorn of the Earth Policy Institute wrote a paper recently called Drilling for Oil is Not the Answer. And they break it down. They say lifting the moratoria on drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and the Outer Continental Shelf would reduce the price of a gallon of gasoline by at most 6 cents. And this would not be seen for at least another decade. And of course, there are environmental consequences of that. I think a Nader Gonzalez energy policy approach would certainly stop subsidies for fossil fuel production. There's no reason why private corporations like ExxonMobil that are having record profits should be getting tax breaks and subsidies to produce more oil. That's what you do as a private entity, is fund your future needs. The other thing is it's important to understand that Senator Barack Obama in 2005 made a choice to put more money into fossil fuel production at a time ExxonMobil was making record profits then, instead of putting money into alternative energies. So I think we need to stop that. I also think that we have to address the rhetoric around clean coal and safe nuclear. It's not accurate. Clean coal continues to emit uranium, thorium concentrations, sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. And with nuclear, everyone points to, oh, the French have this great experience because they've got a lot of energy from nuclear. The only problem is they're dealing with radioactive waste now, and nobody's talking about it. Reprocessing reactor fuel has already contaminated the ocean to the Arctic Circle. There are leukemia clusters around the reprocessing plants. They don't have repositories for waste, so they're exporting this waste that has, shelf life of millions of years, and they're now talking about deep geological drills to find a place to put these canisters. We need solar, we need wind, we need geothermal, we need tidal, we need renewable energy that can also help kickstart a new green economy that will bring with it jobs and a new kind of energy infrastructure and the lack of dependence on this foreign oil.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Castle.
Well, the Constitution Party and Chuck Baldwin and I would pursue a policy of energy independence for America in as short a time as possible. And that means that we would have to pursue all of our energy sources at the same time. We're certainly all in favor of alternative energy, and we would recommend its development with all possible speed, all of the things that Mr. Gonzalez mentioned. But we're also in favor of pursuing our other sources of energy, and it's my conclusion that these things can be done in an environmentally friendly fashion. I think many of the effluents that come off of coal and other sources of energy can be used in other chemical processes, can be recovered and used again. It's been my experience, and my research has told me that. It is not possible to achieve energy independence unless we pursue all sources of it at the same time. And if we were able to do that, to have it, it would free us from blackmail from oil-producing states. Obviously, it would save tremendous money on imported oil. I agree that there should be no taxpayer subsidies to private industry. It goes without saying in energy and in other areas. That's why they're private. So our policy is a comprehensive energy plan across the board, which would help us with rebuilding our infrastructure. I agree with Mr. Gonzalez again that it could be a new economy. It could provide jobs, because jobs are provided through producing things that matter, things that can be sold, things that can be used, not worthless paper.
You know, I think it's important to recognize that no matter what the topic is, whether it's the war in Iraq, Hurricane Katrina, Walter Reed Hospital, the list goes on and on. Government doesn't have the answer. Government isn't the solution. Government is the problem. I'll give you a great example in this area of energy. Now, Matt Gonzalez and I will have a huge disagreement on this one, and that is this whole area of alternative fuel and alternative sources to feed our energy desires. Government came up with this wonderful idea called ethanol. Ethanol suddenly became this go-to new alternative idea. And we invested billions of dollars, made incentives from the United States Congress. Ethanol turned out to be more expensive, use up more oil than literally gasoline does, pollute more, and cause a worldwide food shortage. Yet there were certain senators and congressmen from Iowa in the Farm Belt, where corn is made, that demanded ethanol was the answer. And they convinced their colleagues to go along with it. So now you're going to believe there's this global warming problem, and there's certain liberal legislators who think they have an answer. Let me tell you what their answers are. They sound all feel-goody. Just wonderful. Here's what they are. If you own a home that's 2,500 square feet or larger, they're going to tax you. When you pay your electric bill, they're going to triple your taxes. When you pay your gas bill, your water bill, any utility bill, they're going to triple your taxes. You will be taxed out of your homes if you believe in the idea of government finding a solution for global warming. The solution right now is so simple. It's to drill, drill, drill. Use our natural resources. This idea that you'd have a 6-cent benefit is total, complete garbage. It doesn't exist. It's a lie put out by radical liberal environmentalists. The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, you're right. It might take 10 years from the time we start drilling to get major benefit from it. But guess what? That means we should have started in 1998, and we'd have the benefit right now. You see, that's where liberals throw you off. They told you in 98, don't start now, because it'll take 10 years, and now in 2008, they tell you don't start now. The end result is the mere mention of drilling, the mention of it, drove gasoline prices down dramatically. Before that, it was off the shelf because of liberal politicians that refused to even discuss it. And once it was mentioned, gas prices dropped.
Thank you, Mr. Root.
Thank you.
Rebuttals?
Thank you.
No rebuttals.
Yeah, I would jump in. First of all, Mr. Root, I think that we saw a lot of anti-competitive practices, probably antitrust practices by these oil companies that were making record profits and somehow suggesting that they had to increase their prices. As relates to my citation to the Earth Policy Institute, let me tell you, they're not a bunch of lefties. They are citing U.S. Department of Energy projections that lifting the outer continental shelf moratorium would not increase production before 2017, and that by 2030, production would only amount to 0.2 million barrels a day, less than 1% of current consumption. We're not going to drill our way out of this problem, and there are environmental consequences to it. The Houston Chronicle reviewed data from the National Response Center and found that there had been 595 oil spills across 4 state coastlines, totaling roughly 9 million gallons spilled in the Gulf after Hurricane Katrina and Rita. So, there are consequences to to making these decisions. I certainly agree that we need different approaches, Mr. Castle, but I think that we shouldn't be signaling to private industry that they should pursue nuclear when we have a responsibility as government to say, if something's that unsafe, I'm not even going to let you spend your private money on it because you're never going to get regulatory approvals.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Root.
Well, I believe that an across-the-board approach is the only way. We do have American engineers in France building modern nuclear plants now. They do get 78% of their electricity from nuclear, but I'm not here to argue in favor of nuclear power, although I think it is a long-term option. I'm here to argue in favor of all sources of energy because no matter how much you want to, you simply can't fly a jet airplane with wind power. And without jet service and the other things of our modern world, our civilization grinds to a halt. It's so important to develop every source of energy that we have and to put every available area of technological advancement that have been achieved over the last 30 years since we've been sitting on our hands doing nothing. The world has passed us by in terms of technology. There are many sources of clean technology now. Ethanol is not one of those if you want to talk about using food to produce it. We shouldn't be doing that, but there are many ways to produce liquid fuel from biodegradable sources, such as landfill refuse, wood chips, many things like that can be used to produce liquid fuel, which we have to have.
Thank you, Mr. Castle. Mr. Root, rebuttal?
Well, Matt said there are consequences, and I agree. The consequences could be the destruction of our economy. The consequences could be the loss of millions of jobs. The consequences could be your electric bill going from $300 a month to $900 a month to pay for the idea of making it a cleaner universe. No one is debating that we don't want a clean universe. I have 4 beautiful children ranging in age from my 16-year-old daughter sitting in the front row to a brand new 10-month-old baby. I want clean water and I want clean air, but not at the expense of jobs, not at the idea of tripling my utility bill, not at the idea that I'll be taxed out of my own home, not at the idea...
Mr. Castle, no?
Well, yes, I'll address it. I think that I can make an argument for this bailout crisis being based on pure greed and excess, or I can make an argument for it being a deliberate attempt to destroy the American economy, which is the argument I prefer to make, because I think that's what's happening in just looking. This is not capitalism, it's anti-capitalism. It's a consolidation of this industry, like so many others, like the media consolidated into the hands of 4 or 5 gigantic international corporations, so that everything you read, see, and hear is controlled by only 4 or 5 people. Same type of thing in agriculture. People driven off their lands, off their farms. It's happening here and in Mexico, and all agriculture is being consolidated into the hands of only 4 or 5 gigantic international corporations. The same thing. And out of this meeting that the president has called for shortly after the election, we don't want it to affect the election, you know. But after that, this international meeting that he's called, this Bretton Woods 2, if you will, out of that is going to come demands, calls for a world currency and a world bank. China, Russia, many other countries are already demanding this. What we need is a world currency, they say. That's been the plan all along. Government and their handmaidens in the corporate world create the antidote and the poison in the same laboratory as I mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Castle. Mr. Root? Mr. Root, this is your last rebuttal.
All right. I'd like to mention a couple of comments to what Matt Gonzalez had to say. Matt mentioned that Mr. Nader wants to tax luxuries as if that's a bad thing. I have a nice house. I have a nice car. That's got to be punished. Last I checked, that's what we believed in Soviet Russia. That country collapsed and went bankrupt. That's what we believed in Cuba. They drive donkey carts in Cuba. You know, when you tax the rich, Matt, they leave. When small businessmen get taxed, they swim across shark-infested Atlantic Ocean to Florida to get away from Cuba. It doesn't work. You mentioned corporations are getting away with murder. No, they're not. Corporations have the second highest tax rate in the industrialized world. We've got to cut corporate income taxes dramatically, not raise them. And here's the fallacy. You see, you never tax corporations. You can't tax a corporation. It's a business. They immediately pass it on to the American consumer. You raise my taxes, I raise the cost of my products. All you're doing is hurting every person sitting in this audience right now. It's the same thing when you argue we should unionize Walmart. Well, that's great. The people that work at Walmart will get a fair wage. And everyone sitting here that shops at Walmart, because you and I both know you get a great deal at Walmart, will have your prices doubled and tripled. That fair wage hurts the average American consumer. So you've helped 2 million employees, you've hurt 300 million American consumers. Liberals don't get it. Socialists don't get it. It doesn't work. You can't tax your way to prosperity. You've got to incentivize, you've got to reward success and hard work and creativity and smarts, and you've got to pull people up and allow them to get rich with the money they saved from low taxes, but you can never punish successful people. Thank you,
Mr. Root.
God bless America.
Gentlemen, in the interest of spirited debate, we're going to add one more rebuttal. So that means Mr. Root has one more, and Mr. Castle and Mr. Gonzalez have two more rebuttals. So, Mr. Gonzalez.
You've drawn me out with that offer. Let me say this. We already tax wealth. We already tax income. We already tax excessive wealth. And so this notion that we're not going to tax businesses because that's going to hurt the consumers, and we're not going to tax wealth because that's not fair, presumably we're not going to tax anything under Mr. Root's policy. So I see it's a hometown crowd here, but let's be real. Let's be real here. We need to have money to do all the things Mr. Root wants. I've looked at some of his positions in the past. He wants a strong national defense. Where are you going to get $700 billion to have your military all over the place? And even if he says, well, I don't want my military everywhere, how much of the military are you going to have, and where's the money going to come from? Where are you going to pay for these services? This is not a credible position, I think, to take, to suggest that business taxes are outrageous. Also, the evidence is clear. The last 50 years has seen a decline. 10% of taxes collected aren't even coming from businesses. That is the truth. And so this idea that you want to suggest that isn't true, I would ask you to look at the evidence. Also, ExxonMobil making record profits, $40, $50 billion a year. Don't you think that maybe they should be returning some of that to the consumer in some fashion? I don't see the Libertarian Party bringing lawsuits against, this antitrust activity or speaking out against it or anything like that. And, I think at some point we have to be real. These entities are gigantic. They're making tons of money and ripping us off, and we're getting some of it, a little bit of it back to try to provide health care and decent
pensions. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Castle, you have two more rebuttals. Would you like to use one?
Well, I remind people that the Constitution Party's position is that there should be no direct tax on the American people by the federal government whatsoever. And we believe that if we simply had the budget today that President Clinton inherited from George H.W. Bush, that we could fund it easily with a very low tariff, as the Constitution allows us to do, and with the excises and so forth that the federal government already has. Government has to be reduced to its constitutional size in order to relieve pressure on us. If we had no income taxes, I mean, really, that does sound rather utopian in today's world, but it is possible. It can be done. We existed for over 100 years without it, so why can't we exist without it now? But in order to have it, perhaps we would have to be willing to trade one of our favorite programs in return for it. As you know, as the old saying goes, if it has the word program in its title, it's probably unconstitutional. But we have to reduce government in order to get there. Corporate taxes are counterproductive. They are passed on through higher prices and so forth. So no direct federal taxation on the American people.
Thank you, Mr. Castle. And Mr. Root, the final vote.
I want to know why it's greedy for a small businessman like me to want to make money, but it's not greedy for government to bestow on a privileged class called federal and state employees wages, pensions, and health benefits that are 60% higher than equivalent jobs in the private sector. I want to know why a government employee is allowed to have pension packages that are as much as 80% higher. Why they're allowed to game the system to get overtime, so in the last year of their 20-year career, and so at this point they're 45 years old, they're allowed to retire on 70 or 80% of what they made in their last year for the rest of their lives with full health care benefits for life, and retire at 45 and play golf, while I have to work to 85 to pay the massive taxes so I can send my children to college and pay for their gigantic, absurd salaries. Why is mine greedy, but when government employees do it, it's okay? Why is it okay that in Washington, D.C., we pay $13,000 per student to educate failing public school students? $13,000. 1.5 times the national average, and there's a 90% failure rate. Do we think that maybe those teachers, those educators who support liberal politicians might be guilty of greed? Is that possible? Why are oil companies considered greedy when gas prices go up and oil's at $145 a barrel, of which, by the way, they have zero control? It's decided on a commodities market. But when oil goes back down to $60 a gallon, nobody says anything.
Thank you.
Not
Mr.
one
Root.
word. Greed is a two-headed monster. Thank you. God bless capitalism.
Mr. Gonzalez and Mr. Castle both have one remaining rebuttal. Would either of you like to?
No, I'll pass.
There's another question.
There's one more question. Everyone okay? The three of you certainly by now have had firsthand experience on dealing with the obstacles to getting on the ballot for a national election. One example of these obstacles is the widely varying thresholds each state has for getting on the ballot. Do you think this stifles the political debate? And is it time for political reform, and what form should the reform take? Mr. Castle.
Well, does it stifle political debate? Well, obviously it does. I mean, the Democrats and Republicans in the state legislature totally control ballot access so that it's virtually impossible to get on the ballot in all 50 states unless you have millions of dollars to pay professional petition gatherers. Quite often in their states, their laws are much more stringent for them than they are for us. We're required to produce a certain number of signatures, and they're not, and so forth. And that's because they're controlled by Democrats and Republicans in the state legislatures. I mean, we sue these people repeatedly for ballot access, and the courts back them up in most cases, although we've had some success lately in Ohio and in Tennessee and so forth. But it is a subversion of the democratic process, but it's even worse than that because they also control the debate process through their corporation that they set up a few years ago. It had to be taken away from the League of Women Voters for one reason or another, they said, and given to them so that they could personally control it. Now, people like the three of us are excluded from the debate process. Only Democrats and Republicans can participate. So they refuse to come here and debate us, and they refuse to participate in their debates if we're included. But really, any candidate who has ballot access in enough states to theoretically win the election should be included in the debate process, it seems to me. Along with these two things comes a controlled media, and by that I mean a media who tells us quite clearly that this election is already over. That's why the three of us get a little bit of media attention now. It's already over. We can't hurt anybody. We can't hurt their favorite candidate, whoever that might be. There are many reasons why I think the media is a problem that affects our ability to fundraise, to get our message out to the American people, because it is consolidated into the hands of 3 or 4 or 5 gigantic corporations, because there are certain issues that simply can't be discussed, like the Federal Reserve and the North American Union. And finally, the reason I believe that's because they told us. They told us straight out that that's the way it was, that we were not going to have access to national media. That's what they told Chuck Baldwin and me quite clearly. So, yes, it's a problem, and yes, it's a subversion of the democratic process.
Thank you, Mr. Castle. Mr. Root.
Well, that's about as big a softball question as I will ever get. Obviously, the two-party system is a dramatic failure. Obviously, they're attempting to destroy any other conversation, any other dialogue, any other debate. How do I know? Let me give you a great example. In the state of Texas, Bob Barr and Wayne Root were the only 2 on the ballot for a little while. You see, the Democrats and Republicans, Obama and McCain, missed the deadline. If we, the Libertarian Party, had missed the deadline, we wouldn't be on the Texas ballot. But they missed it, and they hired the best lawyers, they found a loophole, and they got Obama and McCain on the Texas ballot. At the same time that was happening, and they missed it just because they were lazy or they were, missed the deadline through incompetence. But at the same time that was happening, we, the Libertarian Party, missed the deadline in Louisiana by 1 day. Do you know why we missed it? We handed it in on time on the last day, but a hurricane was hitting on that day. And do you know the office was closed, and they said, too bad, it doesn't matter why you missed it, so now we're not on the ballot in Louisiana. Does anyone see the incredible dichotomy between the way we were treated and the way the two-party system was treated? The fact is that if I was on the dais behind a lectern like this with Sarah Palin and Joe Biden, and I was able to talk about the corruption of the political system, the corruption of corporate welfare, the corruption of the war on drugs, the corruption and ripoff of the bailout, the dramatic cuts necessary in spending to change our system and reduce our taxes. If I was the one allowed to do that, I believe the Libertarian Party right now would have the same chance Ross Perot had in 1992, 1996, a legitimate chance to compete and to win a presidential election. But they can't take that chance. Or as Jack Nicholson once said, you can't take the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Root. Mr. Gonzalez.
Well, Mr. Castle mentioned the Commission on Debates, and it's often referred to as an independent Commission on Debates, but as he pointed out, it's led by the former chairmen of the Republican and Democratic parties, Frank Fahrenkopf of the Republican National Committee, Paul Kirk, the former head of the Democratic National Committee. And it's no surprise they want to keep the political spectrum very narrow. Ross Perot was the last candidate led into the debates. He didn't have over 10% support. John Anderson, when he ran against Reagan and Carter, he didn't have over 10% of the vote. And yet, these gentlemen have decided that the appropriate threshold for any of us being in that debate is 15%. They are a private corporation that has created this threshold out of thin air. Actually, they created a threshold that they know cannot be met without being let into the debates. Right. This is retribution for the success of Ross Perot when he first ran, and it's retribution against political parties who are going to have spirited debates about things like taxation and the role of government. I spoke with Jesse Ventura about a month and a half ago when I was in Minnesota, and he recounted his own victory to the Minnesota governorship. He started that race in single digits in the polls. 7 weeks left to the election, they led him into the debates. Why did they let him into the debates? Well, the Republican and the Democrats each thought he would hurt the other candidate. Well, he ended up winning the contest and being elected governor. When I ran for mayor of San Francisco, I was the president of the Board of Supervisors at the time. I started with 6% in the polls and ended, after being allowed into debates, with over 47% of the vote. And I can tell you that Ralph Nader, in at least 4 national polls, polled higher than 5%. In the state of Michigan, he polled as high as 10%. The American people are not going to get change if we can't even have a system of letting candidates compete. And the political spectrum is simply too narrow. We need to break through that. Thank you.
I'd just like to point out that Mr. Castle and Mr. Gonzalez both have a rebuttal each. They'd like to use them? No?
Well, it's tempting to rebut these fellows, but we are all in agreement on the issue, so I'll let it pass.
I think we do have a taker here, Mr. Gonzalez.
Well, let me just say this. I mean, there are two candidates, three candidates who aren't here that would have fit the criteria of being on enough ballots to actually win the contest. The Green Party, the Democratic Party, and Republican parties chose not to participate. But I think it's interesting that, you know, Ralph Nader is somebody that has fought for so many things that we care about, whether it's the Freedom of Information Act, clean air, clean water, automotive safety, the Environmental Protection Agency. He's got a legislative record better than Obama and McCain, and yet they get to tell him that he's not allowed in the debates. I mean, what's wrong with that? And when we look at individuals like the vice presidential candidates of Biden and Palin, wouldn't it be interesting if Joe Biden had to explain how he's a working class guy who's always been voting for banking interests in Delaware, if he supported bankruptcy reform bills that hurt the working class? Or let's have Governor Palin defend her positions that she's taken as governor and her positions on energy policy. What's wrong with that picture? What do they have to fear? They have to fear that there might be any kind of awakening of political consciousness where people suddenly say, gee, you know what? These guys really could hold the office. Before I got elected in San Francisco, people used to say, you can't be a member of the Board of Supervisors. You don't have enough experience. The moment I got elected, they started talking about the different offices I was going to run for, you know? Doesn't make any sense.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Castle?
Well, the Republican and Democratic parties obviously do have something to fear from us because we have an alternative view of many things. Now it's all about money. Money is the source of power. Money created through bank credit and interest-bearing debt. It's to their advantage to keep us indebted, to keep the nation indebted, to keep the American people in debt slavery for their entire lives. Our poverty is their asset, so to speak. They don't want this system threatened by having somebody like the three of us or the other possible candidates. Sure, I'd love to stand here with Sarah Palin and Joe Biden and the rest of us and debate these issues, but people hear them every day. They know what they look like. They know who they are. And so it is a tremendous disadvantage. You know, now, to carry it one step further, if you go to a military home, a veterans home, to campaign, well, you can't do that. It violates the rules. You can walk in and speak to veterans, but you can't walk in and say, hi, I'm Darrell Castle, and I'm running for vice president on the Constitution Board ticket. You can't do that. But when Senator Obama or Senator McCain walk into a veterans home, they don't have to do that because everyone there knows who they are, and they have an escort of maybe 50 people with them. So it is a tremendous disadvantage that we have to overcome. That's why forums like this are so important.
Thank you, Mr. Castle. All right, gentlemen, you have 3 minutes each for concluding statements. Mr. Root?
Yogi Berra once said, one of my favorite philosophers, by the way, the future ain't what it used to be. And I don't think the future is what it used to be. You're going to see some dramatic changes. Bob Barr and I were polling at 6% nationwide as recently as August, as high as 10% in the state of Nevada. Now, are we going to get those numbers without being in national debates? No. Matt Gonzalez pointed it out best. Our campaign manager, Russ Verney, was Ross Perot's campaign manager in 1992 and 96. And in 92, Ross Perot was polling literally at 6%, 7%, right where we were. They let him into debates, and he finished with 19 million votes. That's how they keep us out of the process. But the fact is, on Tuesday, November 4th, we will, with the Libertarian Party and Bob Barr and Wayne Root, get an all-time record for libertarian votes. I am proud to be from a state, Nevada, where we hate taxes but we love guns. I'm proud to be from a state that has no income tax, no business tax, no inheritance tax, and property taxes limited by law. I'm proud to be from a state that's #1 in the country in economic freedom and personal freedom. I'm proud to be from a state that's #1 in America for population growth 21 out of the last 22 years. The American people love our message. How do I know? Because they're voting with their feet. They're moving to a desert state in the far west frontier area of the United States of America, from New York, from Illinois, from California. Why are they moving from states like that to a state like this? And the only answer is low taxation, economic freedom, and personal freedom. They're escaping from the taxes of California and New York. I want to make Nevada a model for the country. I'm proud to compare my record to Barack Obama. We both graduated Columbia University 25 years ago this summer. And in those 25 years since then, I have started businesses. I have risked my own money on business after business. Some failed, some succeeded. I have made payrolls for my employees so they could live the American dream. I've paid health insurance for my employees. Obama has never started a business, never risked his money, never in his life paid anyone else's health insurance, never in his life made a payroll. He's a lawyer, married to a lawyer. Their job is to kill jobs, to sue the job creators. I'm an entrepreneur who wants to create jobs to make the American economy go and grow. I believe America needs a citizen politician who knows that the answer to any question at all, no matter what it is the same. It's none of the government's damn business. Stay out of our wallets, stay out of our bedrooms, and stay out of our way. And as I leave you today, I leave you with the words of my hero, Barry Goldwater. The day will come when we entrust the conduct of our affairs to men and women who understand that their very first job as public officials, when they put their hand on that Bible, is to divest themselves of the power they've been given. The day I put my hand on that Bible, I vow to make my office obsolete, to make it less powerful, to make you more powerful, and to give the power back to the people just as the Constitution intended. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Root. Mr. Castle.
Well, I too have started businesses in different states, if you consider law firms businesses. But I've started law firms in 5 different states, I guess, at one time or another. My wife and I at one time had about 60 employees working for us. Some of them did well, some of them didn't do so well, as Mr. Root said. But I also started an orphanage with my wife, which is something to talk about. It's how charity really should be. We didn't go to the government and ask them to take the money by force from other people and help us start it. But we started it in Bucharest, Romania, because we were moved by the stories, pictures, and live people that we saw, the gypsy children who were in great need, many homeless. And we had this opportunity presented to us 10 or 11 years ago, I think 11 now, to start this. And so we did with one little girl, and now there are about 45 there. And by the grace of God, we were able to make it work and to keep it going for all these years. But my point is simply that charity begins at home, as they say, and we have this opportunity to do it. We could have gone and lobbied the government and asked them to increase people's taxes because we had this cause that we wanted to fund. I'll tell you that just to let you know that in the Constitution Party, we try to put our money where our mouths are. And that's what people are going to have to do if they want this system to change, this system of Democrat and Republican control. People have to start putting their money where their mouths are. And by that I mean it was July and August when the 3 parties that you see here needed the money. It was June, July, and August when it could really have been used ahead of the Democratic and Republican conventions. If people want it to change, they simply have to start supporting people who represent change. And it doesn't take that much. You know, with either of these three people, these three parties. If 5 million people would each donate $20, that's $100 million. That's very competitive. When you have that, the system will be hard-pressed to deny you access. If the people want this system of control through gigantic moneyed interests, then they're going to have to contribute what they can to try to change it. If you can raise funds, then you can get media one way or the other. It's maybe unfortunate depending on your point of view, but that's how it looks. Now, the Constitution Party obviously is the best party to run this country. That's what I believe, to return to constitutional government. But either one of these two gentlemen would be far better than either of the two choices that we've been given, and have been told that they've already won the election. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Castle. Mr. Gonzalez.
Let me say I've enjoyed tonight's debate. I appreciate your willingness to come out here and listen to this. It indicates that you're open to ideas and you're perhaps skeptical of the political spectrum and how narrow it is. I've enjoyed hearing Mr. Root's remarks and Mr. Castle's remarks. I have not agreed with everything they have said, nor have I had an opportunity to express my disagreement with everything they said, or everything I disagreed with. Let me put it like that. But I think it's been remarkable on the number of things that we do agree on. And I think that even in the areas where there's disagreement, I think that we could sit down and rationally have a discussion about where to take this country that would be worthy of our opponents who are not here today. I think if we sat down and talked about our military and talked about having too much of an interventionist policy, perhaps too much of going after and defending private interests instead of national interest, and the need to scale back on military bases and military funding, and if we talked about the need to restore civil liberties, if we even talked on something about health care, you know, we can have debates, we can look at the evidence. You're hearing people want private medical care. You're hearing a defense of private medical care, but perhaps with something else attached to it that takes out bureaucratic messes. You've heard attacks on bureaucracies tonight. My point is that there's a lot more in common here that may meet the eye, but what is underlying that is a deep skepticism about the
Mustang Ranch. The owner, Joe Conforti, made $100 million and chose to pay no taxes. Now you're wondering, why is Mr. Root bringing this up? Why would a vice presidential candidate bring this up? Because he got caught paying no taxes on his $100 million. The government took it over. He escaped the country. He's literally a fugitive from justice. The government took over a bordello, the most successful one in the history of America, and went bankrupt in 1 year. Ladies and gentlemen, if the government can't run a bordello, they can't run health care. Are you kidding me? Do you know Hawaii is the only state in America that until days ago offered universal health care for children? Do you know they canceled it days ago? Their state was literally going under based on the burden, the debt of universal health care, because parents were canceling their private policies to enroll their children in the government health care. Ladies and gentlemen, how many of you know the name Berlinda Stronach? Anyone know that name? Her father's a billionaire, one of the 5 richest men in Canada. She's one of the most important politicians in Canada. She got breast cancer. Guess where she went for treatment? The United States of America. One of the richest women in the world in a free healthcare system chose the United States of America. Is our system great? You'll never see me argue that. God forbid one of my 4 children gets sick. I have no idea how the average person can afford a tragedy, a calamity, a catastrophe, cancer, a terrible car accident. It's not a perfect system. But you know what? Marriage isn't perfect either. What's that old saying? Marriage is the worst institution in the entire world, except all the others. There's nothing better. And neither is health insurance in that exact same category. If you look at England, if you look at Canada, you get sick, 18-month wait for treatment. If you need a hip replacement, 18-month wait for treatment. You need a tooth replaced, 18 months to get it done. Is that what you want? No choice for your doctor and wait 18 months when you're ill? It is not an alternative for this country. It is not a choice that works. Government doesn't have the solution They are the problem, and the reason why they're usually the problem, and I love my esteemed colleagues, both good guys, but both attorneys. And there you see the problem.
Thank you, Mr.
Tort reform. Attorneys are the problem.
Thank you,
Reform
Mr. Root.
the lawyers.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Gentlemen, I think people get together and form governments because they want to get collective benefits from government. I don't think the issue is whether or not all of those benefits are enumerated in a document. We get public schools, we get libraries, we get parks, we have a national defense, we have different things, right? And on the one hand, Mr. Castle, you can celebrate the hospitals for indigent service, but tell us that there's nothing in the Constitution about health care. Well, we have hospitals for indigents because we collectively get together and want to improve our society. The next step of trying to get health care for everyone is a logical step in that. Mr. Root, you say everything government touches is a disaster, but 60% of our health care right now is publicly financed. That's Medicare, Medicaid, the VA, and I'm sure you can criticize it, but let me tell you, for a lot of Americans, this is enormously important. We have a crisis because 50 to 100 million people in our society don't have health care, and the World Health Organization ranks us on the bottom of the 17 industrialized nations. In addition, it turns out that we pay 2 times what all these other countries pay for health care, but we've got the least to show for it. Why is this the case? It's the case because we have a system of private insurance where 1/3 of all the health care dollars are going to bureaucracy and administration. Both of these gentlemen should join me in criticizing that waste. And what we could do with the $350 billion is provide health care to the people that don't have it. Europe does this, Canada does it, Australia, Japan. It's not socialized medicine. The government doesn't own the hospitals, the government doesn't own the clinics, the doctors don't work for the government. This is the government paying for services delivered by the private sector. It's a nonprofit administrator that handles the fee-for-service system. This is what we have, and it is insulting to the American people that after World War II, the richest nation in the country can't get it together with health care. Truman said he would have national health care when he ran for president in 1948. We're still waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Rebuttals? Mr. Root.
Well, first of all, as I just pointed out, universal health care for children only has just proved to be a gigantic failure in Hawaii. Can you imagine if they couldn't even afford to take care of just their children, how you would take the burden of the entire nation, adults, children, everyone, and let the government take over? Won't work. Romney Care. I'm a fan of Mitt Romney. I like Mitt Romney. But the worst idea he ever came up with was Romney Care in the state of Massachusetts. It's already $600 million over budget. Nothing government ever does comes in on time and in under budget. There is no such thing. Only private industry can do that. Matt Gonzalez mentioned public schools and government paying for them. They're a failure, a dramatic failure in our country. There is no better example of the failure other than what Matt brought up as Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Dramatic failure. We're drowning in debt in this country. And when we mention privatizing Social Security as the only answer to save it, the first thing a liberal person will say to you is, you can't do that. Well, really? Do you know who does that already? Federal and state government union employees. They opt out of Social Security, and they invest their pensions in stocks, and that's the reason they get a much better return than the rest of us. You see, the politicians and the state and federal employees don't want us to have the same rights that they've got. When it comes to health care, the answer is tort reform. Get the lawyers out of it. Almost $1 trillion in waste and frivolous lawsuits. The answer is unlink the connection between employer and employee so I can take it with me when I leave my job. If my child is ill, I can't leave my job. I depend on that insurance. But if you have a private policy, you no longer have to depend on your employee. And last but not least, dramatic deregulation so I can buy the best policy for my family in Vermont or anywhere you've got it, and I'm not forced to buy it in this state. Thank you.
Any further rebuttals? Mr. Gonzalez?
Mr. Root, I would certainly agree with you that we need to improve public education. But I don't think that because we have to make improvements that you throw the baby out with the bathwater, as the saying goes. There are all kinds of things government is involved in that is done successfully and that you avail yourself of, whether it's the public streets that got you here, the fresh drinking water that you had today, sanitation, all kinds of things that we're involved in. The effort of government, though, is to make these things work as well as we can. And if we're going to collect taxes from people, any kind of taxes, then we have to collectively decide what we're going to spend that money on. Now, telling me that you're going to celebrate private medical care in this country, well, that's great. People will always be able to avail themselves of it. We're talking about a single-payer system where the government pays for care delivered by the private sector. So you like the private sector. There's nothing about this that eliminates the private sector. What it does, though, is it gives people health care, so we're not giving them health care in the emergency rooms. We're doing preventative care. We're giving them regular doctors that they can see. Now, you can look at other systems. You can give me some anecdotal evidence of one person that may have had a problem or this or that. But systematically, you show me where somebody says that the American system is better than what the World Health Organization told us. The bottom of 17 industrialized nations, I think that's embarrassing.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Any other rebuttals? Sure, absolutely, Mr. Root.
You know, you said something great, Matt. You said that just because public schools are doing terrible doesn't mean you throw the whole thing out. Well, you're right. Just because health care...
This real debate brought to you by Free and